Okay, so we're at the DNC, and I'm talking to my friend Brian Karem, who writes for Salon, right? Brian, Salon.
Correct.
And we are just shooting the shit about being Lebanese, what it means to be Lebanese, what it means when you mess with our kids and we're Lebanese. And you were going to tell me a story. I stopped you so we could record.
Oh, well, when I was younger, my dad had a couple of rules, and here were the rules about spanking. So Pop said, listen, if I ever catch you in a lie, it's your butt. And if you ever raise your hand to your mother, it's your butt. Everything else is negotiable. And I said, well, Dad, what if I raise my hand to you? And he said, I need the exercise, give it a whirl. And so even when no one wanted to mess with my pop, even when he died, he was in his casket, and I had stuck a bottle of Jim Beam in the crook of his arm in the casket. It was an open casket. And my uncle, who was at that time the Chief Justice of the Circuit Court in Louisville, Kentucky, and my other uncle, who was the Senate Majority Leader in the state of Kentucky, were there. And my uncle came over to me, one of them, and said, look, Brian, there's going to be U.S. senators are going to be there, and the governor is going to be there paying their respects because, it's, my brother. And so, with all these people showing up, you should take that bottle out of your dad's arm. And I looked at David and I said, David, that was Dad's favorite drink, and if you want to take it out of his arm, you go ahead. And he goes, oh, no, he might raise up. So that was, even in death, he didn't want to mess with the Lebanese man.
So, my dad's rules with spanking were a little bit different, but not too different. By the way, a side note, did your family tell you that if you stole, they'd cut your hands, that in Lebanon, they'd cut your hands off? Yes. If you lied, they'd cut your tongue out?
Yes. I'm going, well, thankfully we don't live there anymore, but I get the message.
And for some reason, even though I lived in New Jersey, I was like, okay, I don't want my hands cut off or my tongue cut out. But my dad, I love my dad. I told you, my dad raised all 5 of us pretty much by himself after my mom left, but my dad didn't spank us. My dad took a wooden spoon to the bottoms of our feet. Ooh. The bottoms of our feet, and it was torturous. But you didn't make that same mistake twice.
No. And Dad's method of operation was his metal Jerz hairbrush with grooves in it to your ass. And one swat, and you kind of knew that you didn't want to go down that road again. Yeah. So that's why I rarely challenged him. I mean, I knew where the walls were, and I didn't want to try and penetrate them. The boundaries, this was a wall.
Did your dad have, my dad, he couldn't waste any food, obviously, but he had these weird food habits where, especially when driving, when we were driving any length of time, he would get sunflower seeds or any kind of, seed, and he would put it in his mouth, spit it out the window. The whole drive. It was just spit out the window all the time. It was so gross. Did your dad do anything?
My dad would smoke cigarettes. He was a chain smoker. And I rode with him from Louisville, Kentucky to Cincinnati. He was an announcer for Bellarmine basketball. So we traveled from Louisville to Cincinnati driving for an hour and a half, and I was sitting in the back seat. Dad's chain smoking cigarettes, and I hated cigarettes. And so I would have the window in the back rolled down so I could breathe, and I would put my shirt over my nose so I could breathe. And he would take the cigarette, and when it was done, he would throw it out the window, but it would come back in like a heat-seeking missile in the back window, So I'd end up with burn marks. And I was like, oh, sorry about that.
That's funny. Yeah.
And he was also a fan of, my pop was also a big fan of fireworks, and they were illegal in Kentucky. Uh-huh. So every year, him and his brother, the judge, would drive down to Tennessee where they were legal and buy boatloads of fireworks and drive them back to Louisville. Kind of like Cannonball Run, but it was with fireworks instead of Coors, and it was a shorter run. But they would drive back, and one year, I think it was during the bicentennial, he had a display that would rival anything on the National Mall. And at the end, we had this pile of duds, right? So the duds are there, and one of the kids took a match and threw it into the pile of duds. Suddenly there was another explosive event, and my dad had to come in and grab the kid, and he had a rayon shirt, a yellow rayon shirt. Now, for those of you who don't know, that's plastic for you and me. And so he had a skyrocket went right across his chest. He's got this big black, he looked like Shazam, big black mark and an explosion. And yeah, the joys of a Lebanese parenting.
Well, my dad, this is the thing, my dad loved fireworks too. He lived in New Jersey, so whenever we would go to Disney World, he would see the fireworks signs. You know, we'd see them on the highway, and he'd be like, we need fireworks. We got to get fireworks. We got to stop and get fireworks. We want to stop and get fireworks. You had to stop at south of the border, and you had to stop and get fireworks. And oh yeah, he did light them. We did light them on the 4th of July. But the other thing he would do during fireworks was cry. My dad was so sentimental about this country in particular.
You met my dad.
So your dad like that too? Did he do the... You just see it start to bubble up, their cheeks puff out, and they're like...
Him and my dad and my grandfather cared more about this country. He said, and the way I was raised, Grandpa came over and he said, we're not Lebanese American or Asian American, because, or Arab American. By the way, we always call ourselves Phoenicians, and my grandfather was proud of that. Mm-hmm. But he never said that we were hyphenated Americans. You came over here, you're an American. You serve this country. You learn English. You learn, and that was, I can curse in many languages, and especially Arabic, and I can get shot in several. But and I'm fluent in several languages. But the idea, I had to learn Arabic and Farsi later, because in our family you were an American first, and that's something that stuck with me. It stuck with my pop, and they were both very sentimental about this country, and that's I don't want anyone to ever take that away. No.
And my dad used to tell me all the time, and I was like, sure, Dad, whatever. He's like, but in America, there's something special here. He really believed and lived it and exemplified it, that if you really worked hard and you did the right things and you paid your taxes and you put your head down and you worked and you kept your house nice and you kept your yard nice and you took care of your kids, you could have the American dream, the beautiful life for yourself. And he really, really embodied it and believed it. And as much as my dad was a Republican when I was a kid, and till George W. Bush actually, and we used to argue all the time, but whatever we would argue about, we would always settle on this understood love for this country, and that we were coming from a place where we wanted this country to be her best. And I'm so proud of that, and it never changed in me either, and neither of my kids are getting that from me too.
Yeah, and that was a difference. I think when I grew up, there were differences. I mean, my grandfather, for example, was a ward healer, a Democrat, marched with Dr. Martin Luther King. His best friend was a next-door neighbor who was a refugee from the Nazi regime, was an old German, and we always thought it was actually Hitler, but he was because he was as conservative as they come. But him and my grandfather were best friends. They gardened together. They had a garden. They had a shared yard that they gardened together. And this old German and this old Phoenician were just best of friends. And it was because, my grandfather and my dad and the way we were raised, it was like, there were two things you didn't talk about, was religion and politics. Now that's all anybody wants to talk about. And there's more that binds us together than separates us. And my grandfather was aware of that. My father was aware of that. That's the way I was raised. Look, some of the friendliest people I've ever met. I'll be honest with you. I had a rental car. I had trouble. I was in Missouri. I stopped on the side of the road. I've got my press passes on. I'd come from an event. And who stops to help me out but a guy? It looked like straight out of Dukes of Hazzard, man. He had a Confederate flag on the hood. He had a Trump sticker on. He's got a MAGA hat on. He comes over and he goes, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm pretty sure that I've got something faulty and there's wiring." And he goes, "Well, hell, son, we'll take care of you. I'll drive you in." And he drove me into the nearest town, hooked me up. I called AA. never once gave a shit about the fact that I was a reporter, never once gave a shit about who I was. He said, I recognize you from TV. I go, well, gee, thanks for watching, but didn't give me any shit. It was just, and I think most people are decent human beings, and you just have to get away from the things that divide us and, talk more about the things that bring us together.
And that's where we really exist, right? Like we exist in these lives where we are talking about the things that unite us, even if we don't necessarily, that's not the intention. It's just life, right? Like you're talking about, well, did you hear that big boom the other day, or did you see the accident down on Route 57? And again, to your point, I live in a very red town. It's changing a little bit, but it's very, very red. We don't talk about politics. We go to our kids' baseball games. We don't talk about it.
And that's why local media is so important. That's why community media, there's vast news deserts in this country. What brings us together but the shared sense of purpose? Look, you may disagree at a national level on who should be president, but everybody wants a paved street. Everybody wants a decent school for their kid. Everybody wants health care when you need it, police when you need it, and fire protection when you need it. All of those things are governed by what happens at your local, in your local government. And so there's this shared concern, but we don't share those concerns. We're too busy talking about the things that divide us and conquer us instead of the things that bring us together. And that's what's frustrating about the last 20 years, and even the last 30 years. I'll go back to when Biden was in office, and we had the idiots in in the far right, and that's the other thing. The far right and the far left aren't so different, right? The far left doesn't want nudity in films because they say it's detrimentous to women or men or whatever, and then the far right doesn't want nudity in films because they say it's against the law of God. Well, you don't want the same things, yet you hate each other because you don't hate the same things for the same reason. And I'm going, okay, in my family, that wouldn't fly past. My dad would have an enormous amount of fun poking fun at that. But, he's the Lebanese guy, and he's the smart-ass Lebanese guy who's going to make fun of shit. So, but, that sense of humor, that going back to the Lebanese, that's always stayed with me since then.
Yeah. That's important to me as a human being, is to just laugh, and I try as much as possible to always try and find like a spoonful of sugar to go down with all the medicine, right? Because it can feel very depressing lately. It feels that people are intractably stuck in these positions, and I wonder if, first of all, why you think it's gotten this bad. I mean, it's bad, obviously, but do you think it's getting better? Do you think you see any kind of path away from it or out of it?
Well, I think it got worse, and I think the media, my job, I've done for 40 years, I think we are a part of the problem. The consolidation of media, the fact that 6 companies own and operate 90% or more of what you see, read, or hear. Local voices, independent voices. It was Ben Bagdikian from the Washington Post, wonderful man, who said that, look, if you want diversity of thought, you have to have a diversity of ownership. And he wasn't, when he talked about diversity in the media, he wasn't talking about color, women, men. He was talking about diversity of thought. And that's the most important thing, is so everyone's thoughts are heard. I mean, I agree with all of them. I may disagree with what you say, but defend to death your right to say it. That's the idea behind the First Amendment and my grandfather's supper table. But that's a different story. But at the end of the day, that's lacking. And I don't see any improvement. I see the first night of this convention here, out of all the conventions I've covered, this is the most unified I've ever seen the Democrats since '84. I would rate this one first, the 2008 second, and 1996 third. So that's the opening night. So I would say that of the conventions that I've covered, what I saw tonight or on Monday night does give you hope. And it does give me hope as a reporter who likes to piss off both sides. I find nothing better than being able to piss off both sides of the bench.
Congratulations.
As long as everyone's angry. I've written columns that have gotten the right. I've been called a communist and a fascist, and I'm going, I pissed everybody off. I hit my mark. I've done it.
Quite an accomplishment.
I've pissed everybody off. I'm so happy. So that's...
Look, you're bringing the world together.
Bringing the world together. So I'm happy. As a Lebanese boy, I'm happy. So I do find hope, but I think for systemic change to take root, there's got to politicians who helped create this problem, by the way. It started with Ronald Reagan. The consolidation of media, the getting rid of the Fairness Doctrine, allowing multiple ownerships of properties, making sure that you could own everything. And that's just, you got to break up media monopolies.
Yeah.
That, and I have encouraged Biden to do it. Trump wouldn't listen. He likes media monopolies, but I've encouraged the Biden administration to do it. I've asked them to do it. I wrote a book about it. I think that that is long term the best way for a healthy media. Like your efforts and the efforts of, I'm here. What gives me hope here at this convention is seeing the independent media now being embraced, because. And I don't call it mainstream media or legacy media. Let's face the facts, folks. This is corporate media. There is too much corporate media. And if you think that they have a bias towards the left or the right, you're sorely mistaken. They only care. They are responsible to their shareholders. So all they care about is money. And so you wonder why there are reporters in the White House who don't have any experience. That's why. When I first walked into the White House briefing room in 1985, first person I met was Helen Thomas. And another and she knew who I was because my family brought her family to the U.S. And she introduced me to everyone. She made me one of the best Lebanese dinners I've ever had in my life.
What did she make?
She made me kibinai. She made the best tabbouleh. She made jedra for me. And and the best baklava I've ever had.
Oh my God, Helen Thomas.
She was, oh my God, I loved her. So she introduces.
I was a little obsessed with her.
Oh well, and that's why I called my podcast Just Ask the Question, because Helen gave me this advice. She said, Brian, it doesn't matter if the question is answered. It doesn't matter what the answer is. What matters is asking it. Just ask the question. That way they cannot deny that it's been put on the record. Mm-hmm. So don't be afraid to ask anything that's in your mind.
That reminds me, you asked Donald Trump. You were the first person really to ask Donald Trump to put this to him and really follow through with the question if he would accept the results of the election if he lost. You asked him that.
Yes, I did, in the briefing room. I was channeling my inner Helen Thomas because she, the other thing she taught me was to listen to what was said and what she goes, the best questions I've had sometimes, and she would lead off, with most, so she did research for her questions, but she also said some of the best questions she ever asked was by listening to other reporters and what they asked and what the answers were, so she would know what a follow-up was. And she also, the second person she introduced me to was Sam Donaldson.
Wow.
And Sam said, Brian, and he said that first row in the briefing room, so there's more than 200 years of experience. Listen to everybody in that first row. He said, by the way, Helen's got 190 of it. Helen said something smart to Sam, and Sam said, Helen, it's okay to have an unexpressed thought. And she said, Sam, when it comes to you, I have a lot of unexpressed thoughts. And here's where two beautiful, sarcastic smartasses at the top of their game. Yeah. One of them a Lebanese, and Lebanese women you don't mess with. And so I didn't know what I was going to do for the rest of my life, but I knew that day when I was 24, that was one of the best professional days of my life, just knowing that I was where I needed to be. And I tell that story often. And then later that day, every press secretary would bring Helen coffee and donuts every morning. Mike McCurry, you don't get treated like that in the press anymore. They took care of her, and she would sit upstairs in upper press. And I remember Joe Lockhart asked me, he goes, if I knew her, I said, yeah. He goes, let me tell you Helen's story. He says, one day I see her just sitting in upper press, and I go, Helen, what are you doing here? And she's sitting there, and she goes, really, you really are a dumb son of a bitch, aren't you? And he goes, he said to myself, he says, okay, I'll bite. Why am I a dumb son of a bitch? She goes, Joe, I can sit here and watch what's going on and know what's going on before you tell us what's going on. That's why I'm here. I'm doing my job. So I was up, this is my very first day in the White House, and she's upstairs, and Sam followed her around. Sam knew, and he goes, I wanted to follow the best. So I followed Sam and followed Helen. They go in the upper press, and they're beating on the door, and they go, Larry speaks. You get your ass out here. He's the press secretary. Get your ass out here and talk to us. And before Larry could come out, Secret Service comes through. Now, if I did this today, they'd throw me out of the fucking building, but nobody's throwing Helen out anywhere.
No.
But Secret Service came through and they said very politely, Miss Helen, the president is coming through to talk to Larry. Can you didn't tell us we had to leave, but said, could you leave for a little bit? And she goes, all right. So she turns, her and Sam leave. Now, I'm 24 years old. I'm kind of nervous. It's my first time in a White House. I tripped and fell. And I'm on the floor, on my knees, when I feel this hand on my shoulder. And I go, holy shit, the Secret Service is going to beat the crap out of me. And I turned around to look, and who was standing over me but Ronald Reagan? And he looks at me and he goes, well, young fella, you don't have to bow in front of me.
That's perfect. Oh my God. Oh my, your first day. By the way, you do a very good Ronald Reagan. Yeah.
Well, I hear that. I can't say it except in his voice because I still hear it to this day in his voice.
Genius, thing for him to say.
Well, he was yeah. Everybody said he was a funny. I didn't like his politics, but he was a very warm and congenial guy. He was just a dangerous fascist.
Yeah, but one my dad was obsessed with, right? Like my dad was that shining city on a hill was what all my dad ever needed to hear. And so, my dad loved him so much. He loved politics so much. He loves government so much. I was the youngest of 5. My siblings would find they all had their niche, sports, whatever it is. I heard him listening to the Iran-Contra hearings once, and nobody cared. They were like, turn it off. And I was like, they don't want this. He likes this. I'm going to like this. So then I started watching press briefings with my dad, and I learned that Katie Couric was in the front row too, right? When Helen was there. Then which president was, someone recognized her when she was going to retire, right? Didn't they have her stand up? No, Helen. I feel like, was it Bush?
I think it was Bush, yeah.
Senior?
I remember, yeah. No, Junior. I think it was Junior.
I remember crying my eyes out.
Well, she was an inspiration and a mentor to many of us. And she was also a big supporter of reporting. And as she got in trouble later in life because of her support for Palestine. And we're still having those arguments today. Now, whether you agree or disagree with her stance on Palestine, I would remind you that she was probably one of the best informed, most knowledgeable people on this planet of international and national issues. She had covered, I think, every president since Eisenhower. And so, there's pictures of her with Kennedy, and you have to realize, Sam and I talked to, Sam Donaldson actually was one of my biggest mentors, him and Helen. But Sam, above all of them, he goes, Brian, you and I, on occasion, he says, I've asked some stupid questions in that room. I go, I've done it myself. He goes, not Helen. And she was probably, and I think women owe her a debt of gratitude because she was the president of the White House Correspondents Association at a time, and she was her and just a few other women were among the leaders in the press corps when women didn't have many places in the press corps. She broke that glass ceiling.
Oh, that's amazing. And the last question, I guess, would be, because, we've seen with Trump, his approach to those White House press briefings, his approach to the press, the fake news, all of that stuff. We've seen that. We've seen Joe Biden's. You can, commentary on that all day long. But what do you think, what do you hope for if it's a Kamala Harris, Tim Walz administration? What do you think their relationship would be like? What should their relationship be like ultimately with the press?
I think every president's relation with the press is combative. And it's built into the system that way. And that's a healthy thing. The press needs to ask questions of all presidents. Presidents need to be, I often hear, it's not the president's job to be in front of the press. Yeah, actually it is. Because you're responsive to the people. And the people need to hear from their president on a regular basis. So I don't even care if it's, what I told the Biden people is, I don't care if it's every 6 or 7 weeks. He comes in and does a tight 10 in the briefing room and he says, hey fellas, I gotta go. I'm old and I need a nap. It would have been better for him. And maybe what happened to him wouldn't have happened to him. I can't speak to, the conditionals, but what I can say is that every president seems to think that they can determine in their own way how the press is going to operate, and that's not true. We were here before you. We will be here after you. You may try to F with us as much as you want in your own wonderful little way, and all presidents do. None of them are innocent of that. All of them try to steer us. All of them try to bully us. All of them try to break us. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. And the more independent the press is, the less success you'll have. And so this the Democratic Party has embraced independent journalism. Be careful of what you wish for. Be out there and be responsive. Take our questions. Allow us in. Because you want to know the best way to govern? It's with the transparency that we so desire and so need. The First Amendment is it guarantees. We're the only institution, we're the only profession that is mentioned in the Constitution.
Right.
You know, free press, free speech, that's us. That's what we're there for. So embrace it instead of trying to co-opt us, bully us, bamboozle us, flat out lie to us, or avoiding us. Don't do it. That's my advice to every president.
It's genius, and I just want to just real quick as a tangent, because I'm sitting here talking to you, and I'm not part of a corporate media. I'm not part of an establishment media. There's a lot of people walking around here like this who are, which is great, but it is a double-edged sword. They do. I happen to think I'm fine, but I am not high on my own supply. But I'm proud to be here. But I will say this: one thing I do that is very important to me, that journalists do most, right, is that I don't put anything out there unless I'm absolutely certain that it is true. That I'm absolutely certain that I can say, I can vet this, I have sourced this, I know this is true. I'm not a journalist, I'm a content creator, et cetera, et cetera. The double-edged sword here, as you know, right, is there's so many people who are doing what I do are
just
bullshitting or intentionally
misleading.
Right.
The coin of the realm is vetted factual information. Now, you say what's true. You know, there are 3,000 religions in the world who all say they're true. I don't know what I can vet a fact.
Right.
Truth is, in the eye of the beholder, actually. Right. So I try to use the word fact, but you're right.
Yeah.
But factually vetted. Here's the thing I tell everyone in our business, and I told the young kids earlier. I said the vetted factual information is the coin of the realm. If your viewers, if your readers, if your listeners can trust you and believe that you will tell them the unvarnished factual information, despite whatever and we all have biases. We all come to, I'm not going to tell you I'm not biased. I'm biased for Lebanese people. I
think that's a good bias to have.
I'm biased towards a good, Kentucky bourbon, but I do have my biases, but I will admit them when asked, and I will try to vet facts, and I don't care which way, because if my biases won't change because of facts, then that's my problem, and that's when you run into bullshit. That's when you can become a victim of a grift, and so I vet the information. Yeah. And there was a wonderful newspaper that I worked for when I was a kid, the Courier-Journal and Louisville Times, when it was owned by the Bingham family, and they didn't have the greatest profit margin in the world, but they were very successful for many years. They had a long-range goal. You may have hated the Courier in Kentucky. You may have hated them, but everybody wanted to get their endorsement if they were running for office. Why? Because they vetted candidates. Because if you got endorsed by the Courier, even if you hated their progressive stances, you knew you had a 98% chance of winning your election. That's pretty damn good. It's no coincidence that after they sold out to Gannett, we have the rise of Mitch McConnell. Right. Because there's no vetting, there's nothing going on. Above the elevators in the lobby of that wonderful newspaper when I was growing up, there was a saying: everyone had to get on the elevators to go up to the third floor where all the offices were, our editorial offices were. You get in that elevator every morning, and above the elevator was Robert Worth Bingham, the owner of the paper, the original owner of the paper, saying, and it was, "I have always thought of these newspapers as a public trust and have endeavored to run them that way." That is the attitude that is the coin of the realm still of this day. It means that you will have a long future. You may not, there are riches to be made in the world. They're not going to be in journalism. Right. The riches that come with journalism are the front row seated history, traveling the world on somebody else's dime, many times, visiting many people, seeing many things, and learning and knowledge. All of those are what's valuable. I do not care for those who tell me, I know what it was like there. Well, you weren't there, I was there. Yeah, but I saw it on TV. Okay, you weren't really there. You don't know.
Right.
Like, if you watched last night, the value of being here. When the President of the United States spoke last night, I was watching the teleprompter, and I was watching as he spoke. And I wanted to smack his speechwriter, because the places where he stumbled were places that I would stumble, because I was going, what the fuck was written there?
Yeah.
But there was a key moment that you wouldn't know about unless you were here. And as moving as his speech was, when he broke stride and went off script and talked about Palestinian protesters having a point, that they were here, they have a point. There are people on both sides being hurt and killed. We need it to stop. That wasn't on script. That came from the heart. And you need to know that. And most people won't know that because they weren't here.
I will just say that is so powerful what you just said, and being here last night I'm just so grateful to the universe, because I got to be in that room and experience that. It was, I don't have the words yet, Brian, to describe what that was. I haven't really fully settled on what it meant to me to be there, because it was just something I've never experienced before in any way, shape, or form.
Well, in 40 years of covering politics, I will tell you that I agree.
Well, see, we agree on a bunch of things. We agree on all of the Lebanese people are amazing. We agree that Tabbouleh shouldn't have too much bowl.
Best food in the world.
Yep. They have the most beautiful eyes, the best hair.
And the most beautiful women in the world.
Well, yes. Well, I mean, I'm a little biased there, but I tend to agree with you. Brian Karem, thank you so much. This was such a wonderful conversation. I traveled all over the map with this one, but that's actually what makes it so special to me. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's a joy.
Thanks for being on. All right, that concludes this episode of the Are You Effing Kidding Me podcast, because that's my name. The Are You Effing Kidding Me podcast, because I'm Lebanese, so that's how we roll. And Jersey.
Noisy. What exit? Oh, I'm telling
Tough room.
Oh, that was an ugly child, too.
Is there anybody you can't do? We got Reagan. Who did you do yesterday? Columbo.
Yeah, excuse me, ma'am. I could do Columbo.
Amazing.
And John Wayne. That's
Oh my God,
Yeah.
Reagan was just, oh my God, flat. I was like, where? He's here. He's risen.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you. And, I'll make a plug.
Okay.
It's the name of the book is called Free the Press. If you want to learn about my thoughts on the press, I do have a podcast called Just Ask the Question, based on Helen. You can see that wherever fine podcasts are sold. And the column is every week in Salon.
Love it. Thank you so much. Okay, well, see you guys next time. Thanks, Brian.